My eyes caught a letter on the table, and I picked it up to read. In the letter, my wife informed me that she'd been in a relationship with my best friend long before we met. And my kids weren't mine. They were all my best friends. My knees couldn't hold my weight anymore. I fell on the floor and broke down in tears. My wife Julia and I got married 20 years ago. Before we did, we both had to go through quite a rough part. My name is Mark, and I'm 47 years old. I met my wife 23 years ago when she was 22. We both attended the concert of a musician who happened to be our favorite, and were in the same row. We clicked immediately and became friends. Our friendship grew and progressed into a romantic relationship. 2 years later, I proposed marriage to her. My wife was so happy and agreed to marry me. My family members knew her already. They were equally excited when we broke the news of our engagement to them. The problem came when I was introduced to her parents as the man she wanted to get married to. Now, I worked at a popular chocolate producing company and was getting quite a high pay, meaning I was doing well for myself. I couldn't understand why, but my wife's parents had the belief that if she got married to a rich man, she'd end up regretting it. I thought that was weird. I mean, isn't it almost everyone's dream to marry someone wealthy? Besides, I wasn't even that wealthy. I was just able to provide well for myself. I did all I could to make them see the good in me, but they stood on their belief. If I got them gifts, they'd say I was mocking their status. They were between middle and low class, and point out to their daughter that I'd do the same to her. It was frustrating for me. My wife tried, just like me, to convince her parents that I wasn't like those kinds of men. Eventually, after almost 3 months of begging, they finally agreed, and only because my wife threatened to have the wedding without them and leave the States forever.
I should have threatened them like that from the beginning.
I was elated. Finally, I'd be able to take the next step with my wife. We began our wedding preparation process. It was quite a stressful period for us. I had to miss work so many times due to my presence being required in some situations. One day, just a week before the wedding, I was fired. It came as a great shock to me. They knew I was planning my wedding. I apologized every time I was absent and had gotten permission since I had given reasons each time I was away from work, so I couldn't understand why they would suddenly fire me. I tried to talk to some of my colleagues, but there was nothing they could do except sympathize with me. With my head hung low and my chest filled with sadness, I left the building. My wife comforted me and assured me that I'd find a better job soon. I believed her words. The wedding pushed forward, and it was a great day filled with happiness. After our wedding, I began job hunting. My in-laws had no idea that I didn't have a job anymore. I spent a whole month job hunting without success. Finally, in the second month, I got a job as the head director at a news publishing company. I was extremely happy, and the only negative thing about it was that I'd have to work long hours. I only had Saturdays off. It was quite challenging for me as a newly wedded man, but I had no choice but to take the job. My wife assured me that we would figure a way to make the most of the little time I had off together. A year into our marriage, my wife got pregnant. You can imagine my excitement when she broke the news to me. The thought of becoming a father gladdened me so much. Although I was always at work, I was lucky enough to have my younger brother who helped me out. My wife quit her job as she was advised to not do anything stressful by the doctor. My brother, who followed her for her checkup, told me that. Seeing how helpful he was, I asked him to move in with us. Luckily, he agreed. I was relieved to work as long as I could, as I had my brother to help out with my wife. I wasn't bothered about whether they got along well, as they were friends long before I knew my wife. My wife gave birth to my son after the 9th month. My brother was the one who went with her. On reaching the hospital after work that day, I cried. He looked just like my wife and was so adorable. 2 years later, we had our second child, a girl. We had 2 more, a boy and a girl. 3 years later, before we decided to stop, I did find it odd that none of the kids looked like me. They all looked like my wife. It made me a little sad, but I was fine with it and didn't give it much thought. While I was always away, my brother assisted my wife in raising our kids. I did miss out a lot during their childhood years, but I tried to make up for it on the few days I was at home. Although it didn't seem enough, it was at least something. As they grew up, I noticed that they seemed to be closer to my brother. They did regard me as their father, but their closeness with him was more than the one we shared. I mean, I kind of expected it, since he was more present than me. Eventually, he decided he needed to start his family too. My kids were grown already by then. After that, he wasn't around quite so much. Although it was hard for them, they had to accept it. My wife got a job for herself. Before she started, she informed me that my best friend had volunteered to take care of the kids while we were away. I was surprised. I saw him the day before, and we didn't discuss anything like that. I know he ran his own company and had all the time, but he could have at least told me about it, so I could show my appreciation. Anyway, I agreed. While my wife and I worked, he took care of the kids. Soon, they began to sleep over at his place, including my wife. When I asked, she said she couldn't spend a night without the kids, and they seemed to love my best friend a lot. Since he wasn't married and convinced me that he had no problem with it, I was fine, and even thanked him. Soon after, I noticed that my wife packed some of her things and all of the kids' things and moved them to my best friend's house. Sensing that it was beginning to swerve to another direction, I quit my job. We'd been married for 13 years by this point, and I'd already saved up enough money to start a business of my own. After I quit, I asked my family to return home. However, my wife kept giving one excuse after another. It soon became clear that she didn't want to leave his house, which made me very concerned. Why would she want to remain there when they finally had me to themselves? I drove to my friend's place, got my kids and their things, and drove them home. That night, my wife finally returned home. I expressed my displeasure at her behavior, and she apologized. I did forgive her. I started spending more time with my kids. They appeared to enjoy it, but whenever my best friend came over to visit them, they were the happiest. I was a little jealous, but I believed they'd get like that with me soon too. Luckily, they began to get used to me, just like they were with my best friend, but there was still small differences. Still, I believed I'd be able to win them over in no time. I noticed my wife always returned at very late hours. In her words, her job was extremely demanding. It was fine with me, as it gave me more chances to be alone with the kids. I'd been processing my own business, and just before it launched, I had to travel for a week. When I told my kids about it, they appeared sad, and I was happy to see that reaction. It meant they'd gotten closer to me. My wife had to take a 1-week leave from her workplace to be with them, as I refused to allow them to spend that week at my best friend's house. For the first 4 days, I talked to them daily. However, on the 5th day, I was suddenly unable to reach them. I tried again the next day, same thing. I was forced to call my best friend, but he wasn't reachable either. I was alarmed and had to quickly wrap up everything and return home. I found my house empty. I called out for my wife and kids without a response. My eyes caught a letter on the table, and I picked it up to read. In the letter, my wife informed me that she'd been in a relationship with my best friend long before we met. And my kids weren't mine. They were all my best friends. My knees couldn't hold my weight anymore. I fell on the floor and broke down in tears. I rushed out of the house to my best friend's and met the gates locked. Not knowing where else to go, I went to my in-laws, but they were also gone. I saw my life crumble before me. I called my brother in tears and told him of the situation. He confessed to me that he'd suspected all along. According to him, my best friend was always at my house during the time he stayed at my house. And the main reason he left my house was because he caught my wife kissing my best friend. I was even more angry at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I inquired loudly, my tears pouring freely. He answered that he didn't want to be the one to end my marriage. I hung up the call, feeling a deep sense of sadness and betrayal. There were so many questions on my mind, but the one I needed an answer to the most was, why didn't she marry him instead? My life was shattered. No matter how hard I tried to bring it back together, it broke at the end. I resorted to drinking to forget my sorrows. My brother apologized for not telling me everything he knew and helped me to stop drinking. 2 years later, I already had my business and was doing well with it. I was still a sad man, but I was slowly accepting my misfortune and trying to move on. Just a few months ago, I got a call from an unknown number. As I picked it up, it turned out to be my mother-in-law.
Your friend and our grandkids had a plane crash and are all dead. Julia is losing her mind. She's also been diagnosed with kidney failure. We need your help, Mark. We have no money, and we can't find a match for her. Help us, Mark.
She was in tears. I couldn't believe how shameless she was to call me after what they did to me. I traveled to where she was and got tested. It was revealed that I was eligible to be a donor. Her parents were thrown into excitement. They couldn't stop thanking me. However, I cut their joy short when I refused to be the donor. I only came here to show you evil people how it feels to get your happiness destroyed. I told them I didn't care about the dead children, nor their father. Neither was I concerned about their daughter. Right in their faces, I told them I wished nothing but misery for them and Julia, their daughter, before storming off. I returned home, ignoring their numerous calls. The last thing I heard about them a month ago was the death of Julia. Karma does hit hard,